later on, I saw in the newspaper that Mike Collins, the publicity person for Channel 17, was giving a talk. So I went to see him and talked to him. It happened to be that he was girlfriend of somebody I knew from South Buffalo. It had a whole connection in that. So we discussed quite a few things about that. But he told me that they needed volunteers. I went to the station, I volunteered, and I was really the only person who knew something about television. The volunteers were just, quote, volunteers, good-hearted people, but I was the one that had television production. So I was kind of like training them along as we went. And the boss gave me a pat on the back at one time, but then apparently they hired 4 people, and I was not one of them. And I'm thinking, why not me? And so I went to him. He said, well, I didn't know you wanted a job. And of course, I didn't know there was a job available. So as it happened, the one fellow that was hired, one of the 4, he left. He went to go back to the Bethlehem steel plant, which I'm sure was a lot more money than I was going to make. So I was the next person in line, and I got the job there and got into production, quite a bit of production, cameraman, studio supervisor, worked my way up, producer, director, production manager, and all of that. And I thought, this is my career. The rest of my life, I'm a production person. And God laughed and said, no, I got another idea for you. The manager came up to me and wanted to know if I wanted to be the interim ITV director. I said, sure. Yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, $5 more a week. I didn't know what it meant, though. Instructional television. So I had to learn. And I think actually my not knowing much about it meant that I would have to work with a committee, find out what these people were about. I really listened a lot to what they were and what they wanted to do. So things got off to quite a good start from that aspect. But along the way, I said, I love marketing. So I said, why don't we they had all kinds of programs, foreign language programs, American literature programs, phonics programs. In fact, speaking of phonics, we had a nun that taught phonics on TV. We called her Sister Phonics very lovingly. And I went into a classroom when she was on videotape, and she the very beginning of the show, she says, well, somebody's not sitting up tall. And the kids go like this. And they look at me. I was sitting up tall, and I realized how personal that meant. You know, just like Mr. Rogers talking to kids, I realized that there is something in this. So I started targeting the idea of using television for reading. One summer, another summer, things like that. But as I was doing this, I came across, the fact that kids really don't read during the summer, and that it takes teachers so much time. I'm sure Pam and Barb know this, so much time to get the kids back. And I said, that's a problem. That shouldn't be. I knew instantly that I think television could solve this problem. And of course, take it to California, called it the summer loss phenomenon. Leave it to California to give it a name, right? So we worked into that. Spent some summers. Now, the one thing that we did right away was get a program that offered scripts. You mentioned Dukes of Hazzard at one time. They used to offer scripts. And I said, well, Studio C, a program produced in South Carolina, offered scripts. I said, well, it's a good show. Let's do that. Well, it really didn't turn out too well. I was discouraged. We had a few libraries, this, that, and the other thing. And I was ready to say, maybe this is not a good idea. But then I got a nice letter from a woman named Diane Chrisman. In fact, I have it here. She is the coordinator of work with children for the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. And she wrote, this seems like a good time to reflect upon the library's experience this past summer with Studio C. Now listen to this. Although a limited number of libraries were involved in the project, and despite the fact that some mistakes were made in planning and execution, which is my theory, I feel strongly that it was worthwhile. It was our first attempt to combine library programming with television, and the concept, which seemed doubtful to me 6 months ago, now is filled with enormous potential. And she closes with, I have no doubt that the kind of program you envision would be highly successful. If the library can assist in this project, please let me know. I'll look forward to our next meeting when we begin to plan for next summer. So there it was. I mean, I probably, if I didn't get this letter, there might not have been a Reading Rainbow. And I worked with committees, and we were batting around all ideas. The electric company was on the air and worked with skills, this, that, and the other thing. But one of the, when we were trying to figure out what we really wanted to do, there was a fellow named Dr. Bill Eller. He was at the University of Buffalo. And he said, why don't you do what television does best? Let's motivate a kid to read. Motivate a kid to read. And he said, you show me a kid who reads, and I'll show you a better reader. So that whole motivation thing was what we were aiming for. None of the skills. I was thinking, well, we'll put a word on the screen, we'll do this, we'll write words. And no, that wasn't. Motivation was the key. And so we picked up on that. And, how to do that? Well, how about a good host? For me, somebody like Mr. Rogers. It's that simple. I mean, Mr. Rogers, it's that simple. Somebody like Mr. Rogers. And then, obviously visiting a library because you wanted kids to know about books that way. I never wanted a big animal walking around. I wanted somebody personable like Mr. Rogers. That was a simple thing. Somebody who was a person who believed in what, he's talking about and allowed the kids to understand that, they were important.
There were a number of names that were being considered and tossed around, but nobody was jumping off the page at the producers. And one of the associate producers, Lynn Brenner-Gannick, had seen LeVar Burton at a conference. This was probably 5 years prior to her being involved in Reading Rainbow. Late 70s. LeVar was recently off of Roots. This was a conference where LeVar was one of the speakers. And after the presentation, Lynn noticed a bunch of teenagers hanging around LeVar. And she said they were just mesmerized by their conversation with him. So that was stored in Lynn's memory bank. When she was working on Reading Rainbow, and they were working on trying to find a host, she learned that LeVar was going to be a guest on a New York City local news magazine program called Live at 5 with Susan Simons. And she called Cecily Truitt, who was the producer by this time, and said, tune in at 5 o'clock. LeVar Burton's going to be on. And they saw this interview, and Cecily immediately said, this is our host. Lynn, go get him. Get LeVar Burton. So Lynn tracked down LeVar's manager, a woman by the name of Dolores Robinson. Lynn called Dolores. LeVar was in New York, about to leave for Africa to do an episode of, I believe it was American Sportsman, and he was going to be on a whitewater rafting trip down the Zambezi River. So they managed to connect with LeVar. LeVar said, this is a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. I believe that television can do good things, and I'm very interested in this. If you can use television to connect kids to books, this is something I want to be a part of. He left for Africa and came back directly to the set to shoot the pilot episode of Reading Rainbow. And nobody had met him. None of the production team had met LeVar. They obviously knew of his work with through Roots. And Cecily tells the story of meeting LeVar when he arrived on set and said, is there anything that we can get for you? And LeVar said, I would love a glass of orange juice and a toothbrush. And then they shot the pilot episode.
I was there when for the pilot episode, and I was kind of off the background. And I could hear the beginning of the program, and I could hear LeVar, offset. And I could tell, boy, this is good. This is going to be good. Dr. Edgar Dale said, words are the names we give experiences. Well, how about television? Going out on a field trip, bringing kids experiences they would never get out otherwise. And I wrote, how about kids telling other kids about the books they liked? That too is common sense. Adults do it all the time. Hey, I like this book. You should read it. Well, why not kids doing that? Those were the things that I worked with from the beginning.
Tony's summer television and reading experiments were groundbreaking, and they were humble in the regard that everyone in the community was just looking at them as, oh, this is very interesting, and we're on our way we're paving the way. We're illustrating the TV and reading can work together, and I would say that his work was getting the attention of a lot of people. And he was also cultivating friendships with people at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and at other institutions in the public media system. And I think the thing that we have to talk about is how Tony then really built a team. It's very challenging for a single local station to become the creator of something that becomes Reading Rainbow. It's really a set of people that all come together in different ways. And I think that is something that I think Barb and Tony and I took a lot of care to acknowledge what that meant and how it worked and who Tony went to go find and why. And those aren't stories of a funny, hilarious moment, but they're seminal moments in which people who had all roads kind of leading to the opportunity to be together. They say in reflection now, their lives, their careers were forever changed. But Tony was in the end helping find and pull people together and creating this remarkable team too. There's a last chapter that I think we all really care about because it has reflections, and it has this title that kind of hung with us across the framing of the book and the writing of the different stories and the different chapters. But frequently, and often it would come from Tony first, but the concept of the butterfly effect and the idea of, something special is happening here, and a little movement over here has affected something interesting and fascinating over here. And Barb calls it incremental change, and Tony often referred to these as his, holy moments. But these were things that propelled the enterprise forward. And when we would look at what LeVar might say, or what the producers, Larry and Cecily, might say, or what director Ed and his wife Orly might say, everyone in this reflective last chapter had comments about there was something special going on, something that only happens, maybe once if you're lucky in your life, but something rare and unique was going on. And the sun was always shining on Reading Rainbow and the people working on it.